Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. It's for some say, and welcome to our June GDTA Spotlight. Welcome to the Global Design Thinking Alliance, our monthly session, which we are holding since several years now, as an online event of the Global Design Thinking community, which the GDTA consists of 36 member institutions in 23 countries in 5 continents. And we have lots of our members visiting today and being part of our session with Jenni van Niekerk. And I'm really happy to see you here and to welcome you, Jenni. We had our encounter first time in 2022, actually, when you were fabulously orchestrating the d.confestival, the first one which was not done in Potsdam, the first one which was done after 15 years of existence of design thinking in Potsdam, the D School Potsdam. It was done at the D School in Cape Town in South Africa, and you did an amazing job in bringing a lot of very, very interesting people together from all around the world. And that was also the moment where I had the first time got in touch with the network of interested institutions in Africa, and not only the South Africa, but actually all around the whole continent. And I'm really happy that you are agreeing to share about your experiences with building up that network. I think the first meeting of those people was actually happening during the d.confestival, if I remember right.
That's right.
Yeah, and Jenni, you are highly connected to the D School Africa since several years now. The official opening was actually in 2022, together with Hasso Plattner. But the program is already running. The student program and professional program is running since several years, and we are very happy to join forces with you. It's also Hasso Plattner Foundation-driven activity, and you worked as a curator, but your background is in social anthropology, and you got a master's in communication for development. And you are very much dedicated to do something with design thinking, with the whole community, to get the world in a better shape, to get the public sector more focused on the civilians, on the people. And so I'm really looking forward to what you are. And actually, I'm thrilled that you are here to learn about what happened through the past 2 years here. I know a little bit, but please give the stage to Jenni, and a warm welcome, Jenni van Niekerk.
Thank you so much for that welcome, Uli, and the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all today. Wonderful to see so many people here. And I see a lot of African names as well, if I can judge by the names, and just all of you. So nice to see you and to be with you again. Some of you have connected with me before, perhaps through d.confestival, and I've shared about d.confestival in a spotlight before. Thank you for inviting me to tell you about the network and share a little bit about the journey we've been on since d.confestival. So let me share my screen and let us begin. All right. How's that? Sharing okay?
Looks
all
good.
right.
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Great.
so let us go for it. So let me start to begin. Let us engage a little bit from all of you. Instead of just listening to me, I want to listen to you for a moment. So if you see this term, Africa is, I would love to ask all of you to complete this sentence by typing in the chat. Please, for a moment, just a minute, let's hear what all the things are you think about Africa. Just whatever comes to mind. You don't have to think about it too hard. It might even be certain stereotypes you hold or what you think about Africa. Let's see. So I'm reading energy, full of opportunities, diverse, huge potential, adventurous, more than the geographical Africa, Elizabeth says. A fabulous young continent, huge, that's right, diverse, a huge space, an interesting continent with lots of cultures. The only continent left that's still authentic. Different, big, marvelous, colorful, full of languages, a treasure, the home of Ubuntu, wonderful, huge diversity, traditional. We see the word behind, says Obed. Big and diverse, beautiful, alive, energy, smart, potential, more closely aligned to design thinking than Europe. The womb of humanity. So I've seen young and I'm also hearing old, full of culture, the be all and end all, inspirational. Wonderful. Thank you so much for all those contributions. So I'm not going to synthesize or analyze that too much, but just to note, look at the way that we see this continent and its people and its activities. There is so much diversity. It is enormous. When it's not flattened out on a rectangular map, Africa is enormous and contains just so much. And it's also interesting to see what stories we tell about Africa. So interesting there, we saw and someone wrote, Africa is behind. And then also Africa is the womb of humanity. So much started, there's so much ancient tradition, and yet there's also a lack of progress in some respects. And we have to look at the history of colonization. We think of arts and crafts in Africa. Do we think about design in Africa? What happened to design when colonialism hit our continent? What has happened with all the borders and just so much history, so much interest that there is for us to consider. So something to think about is these words from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who did a brilliant TED talk, The Dangers of a Single Story. And she says, among other things, the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they aren't true, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So it's really important that we look at the power of the stories we tell. And I do ask myself, who am I to be telling the story about design thinking on the African continent? I'm not a newcomer to the continent. I've been here from my ancestors of many generations, but I am, in my experience, a white South African who has had the privilege of, the experiences that came my way, and yet I stand here humbly in service of the continent and put my gifts and opportunities to the best work that I can, and I really honor that opportunity. So yes, we certainly face adversity on this continent, but there is also an explosion of innovation and creativity and design capacity that we can look at that was here before colonialism and which happens independent of Western influences. So financial technology innovation is really leapfrogging the financial banking kind of solutions that Europe has had for centuries. We are seeing that, in fact, while design thinking and human-centered design in those terms may be relatively new on the continent, creativity and collaborative problem solving is not new. We're very familiar with notions of storytelling, sitting together, listening in conversation, hearing different points of view, working together in community, finding solutions to everyday adversities. It's just inherent in day-to-day living. So there is so much that we can look at on this continent. And yeah, this makes our work really interesting. So looking at that sort of context let's see, where does the D School come into this? So I work as a contractor to the D School Africa at the University of Cape Town. And we're proud to be a school of design thinking in and for Africa, hoping to empower people from all walks of life to use a design thinking mindset to really create human-centered solutions in our world. So while we're based in Cape Town in this beautiful building that was completed and launched 2 years ago, we're also growing a community of practice for design thinking with other institutions on the African continent. Now, one of the programs the D School has been doing for a few years is this design thinking in Africa. an online program which is happening now in partnership with 5 other universities, starting in July. It's a 6-day program with multidisciplinary teams collaborating and working on a challenge that's set in collaboration with a project partner. So with that going on, we also started looking at what other networks can we grow. So we ask ourselves, what is the relationship now between the GDTA and Africa? So currently, only the D School Africa and the American University of Cairo are official members of the GDTA. Yet we know there is a rich diversity of design thinking activity on the continent and a lot of growing interest. So we're experimenting with this idea of what a regional chapter of the GDTA might look like, where you've got like-minded institutions within a regional context, as while there's still diversity, there's a like-mindedness and common challenges and, context to work with. And it's really important when I say that context in plural, that Africa is not a country, as some people speak of it as one great big mass, but as of course we know, there is a lot of diversity. So we steer away from speaking about one African context. So anyhow, with this idea of a regional chapter, this collaboration network offers us an opportunity to prototype and experiment with what such a chapter might look like. So we wonder then where that might go, and we continue to engage with the GDTA around that. So where did this all start? So as Uli said, the d.confestival was hosted for the first time outside of Europe. It was the 3rd edition that was hosted in Cape Town and online. And we had significant representation of African participants, although many were South African, being based here. We also had people traveling from afar, but these numbers also include our online participants. And of our speakers, 21 were from the African continent, and those being 10 beyond South Africa's borders. And we really had, through our speakers and discussions, the spotlight on the significance and application of design thinking in Africa and the global South. So there's really now an interest, like, what is design thinking outside of the global North context? And there you see from the graphic harvest just some of the themes that emerged around talking about Ubuntu, for example, this African philosophy or even way of being that considers that we are people through other people, that individuals alone, individuals derive meaning and community and relationship through others. And this aligns with our design thinking principles in that in its focus on empathy, its focus on understanding from other points of view. So this is very interesting for us. We can discuss a little bit more later when we come to our discussion. So what happened around the d.confestival, we invited a group of invited guests who were our founding participants, and we held a strategic session where we imagined what an African Collaboration Network for design thinking could look like. So we had institutions from North, East, South, and West. We had Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa in the room. And we made these connections between what is already existing, what is going on, that we can connect, what are the possibilities, and what might the intention be of such a network. And so here it is an open, growing ecosystem of organizations that are building capacity and knowledge in design thinking in Africa. So it's facilitated by the D School Africa, and we are lucky to have funding from the Hasso Plattner Foundation to enable this work. So the purpose, as it was articulated at the start and has been tweaked a little since then, is to convene and nurture an African network and community of practice of like-minded institutions of learning and development, with a focus on design thinking in diverse African contexts, with the purpose of collaborating to share ideas and resources, to mobilize, build, and disseminate knowledge, and to build capacity in design thinking on the continent that is responsive to local contexts, and contribute leadership and innovation in design thinking from a Global South perspective. So watch the space to see what's emerging. So with that purpose, these are some of the important principles in the approach that we take. So firstly, we're using the design thinking process to build the network. It was really important for us to really build relationships and connect and understand and empathize firstly. So to really understand who it is that we are working with, what they are doing, what they need, and how we can do that. And there's really been a co-creative process, not just the D School doing it, but really inviting co-creation. And the notion of experimentation and iteration is very apparent in how we work. The other important principle is to be humble and curious. As the D School, we've acknowledged we do not have all the answers. We may claim in writing to be the center of excellence, but we're the center of learning, really. So really appreciating that there are multiple plural ways in which people are naming design thinking, understanding it, teaching it, applying it, and to really look and learn from that, knowing that there is no one right way. Then there's the important principle of seeking to reframe design thinking from a Global South perspective, really acknowledging that there are endogenous traditions of problem solving and celebrating the continent's capacity for innovation. Then it's important that we adapt for language, for culture, for economy, and look at the range of settings and how to make design thinking accessible, inclusive, and responsive to those. The other is there's a great bias towards action. Listening to the members and what they are wanting to do, people really want to see design thinking used to solve real-world problems and come up with tangible solutions and to reach people who need it. So there's an emphasis there. And of course, then on praxis. So from that doing, we learn. So there's this dynamic cycle that there isn't just a set of knowledge to be taught in a didactic manner, but that there's this cycle between teaching, learning, doing, and that what is taught is grounded in practice and lived realities. So that is something that's happening within the D School more broadly, that the programs team are always being responsive and adapting to how they are teaching, and the learning lab within the D School is also really looking at these questions from a kind of learning and research point of view. So we are fortunate to be in a position to be funded to play an ecosystem building role. Now that is rare, we realize. Networks can be a real force for change, but they are not easily recognized or they're difficult to know, well, who do we fund and how do we do this work? So we're very lucky to have the funding, and we see that people are really grateful for this opportunity. So it's open at this point for anyone to join. There are no membership criteria or screening processes. The focus is on individuals and organizations who are involved and interested in teaching and learning design thinking in Africa. So that's who we're inviting. And there's also interest from the consultants who are practicing design thinking. And we keep that open because we realize that many who are teaching are also consulting, and that there is value in learning from practice. And this is where we're going to learn, in that praxis that we were speaking about. And so there are layers of roles and ways to engage in this network. And this is something that I am just been kind of trying to figure out still. But really, if you look at this diagram at the bottom, starting with the D School Africa as the facilitator, the convener, the catalyst. So as much as we want it to be open and co-creative, it needs a driver. And so D School plays that role, and I'm lucky to be the convener. And then we have closest to us our founding participants that I can always go to and talk to and ask for contributions. And then it's been helpful, I've seen, to develop working groups so that we're not just asking a mass of people to come and join in on a project, but really to develop working groups of people who are passionate and dedicated and have the energy and capacity to do something. Then outside of that, we have others who become active contributors. So they may be speakers who come and present in an online conversation circle, or people who are willing to share resources or use the platforms. And then outside of that, we have a looser, less active, growing network of members, some who are watching, learning, posting now and then, but less active, and that's fine. And then important to articulate on the outside circle is that we're doing this in service of society and with other partners. And that is how it's envisioned, is that what we do will eventually feed into those broader users to make this work meaningful. Right. Then we look at some of the activities and what we do. So we started off doing a stakeholder mapping survey in about July last year, which gave us a sense of who we're working with, who's out there, just mapping who are the various people teaching and doing design thinking in Africa. So it wasn't a completely comprehensive, it doesn't produce a comprehensive picture, but the gathering of new members continues. So we keep learning. So on the top row, I send out a monthly newsletter, which contains resources and news of what's coming up and so on. We run a monthly online conversation circle, and these have been wonderful. They are co-created. We have different speakers. We come together in a similar way to the Spotlight. And then we've also had more kind of much more interactive, facilitated workshop type style conversation circles too. There's an ongoing weaving connections that I do. So it's not just these platforms, but the meeting people one-on-one, connecting them, finding out what they're doing, what they're interested in, and so on. And connecting the offers, what people are offering and what people are needing. So there's that matchmaking role that I play. Then there's some online platforms that we use. So there's an online knowledge resource hub where people can share open source resources, and we're especially seeking to create a repository of teaching and knowledge materials that are generated in Africa. So there's a big need for that. We also have an online directory of design thinking, not so much practitioners, but people in the learning and teaching spaces. And there's a LinkedIn group. And then at the bottom are particular projects that we're focusing on. So the big one we're working on at the moment is gathering African design thinking stories. And this speaks to the need for cases and examples and stories of design thinking generated in Africa by Africans in order to support people's teaching purposes. So that's something we're working on at the moment. And then another two projects that have been identified as priorities that are still kind of in embryonic stage are to develop a multilingual design thinking glossary to translate some of these terms into other languages and develop a basic toolkit. So that's the one. And the other is to undertake collaborative research on the localization of design thinking for Africa. So very interesting, some of our things that we're up to. And this is one to give you a snapshot of who is it that we're working with. So as I said, the stakeholder mapping survey we did had limitations, but there we got responses from mostly South Africa. That happened to be where the survey reached, followed by Kenya and Ghana. And then we noticed we had very few responses from French and Portuguese speaking Africa, as well as North African countries. But then in further engagements, we've seen in conversation circles, we ask people to drag a dot to their location on the Miro board. And this is where we've seen much more greater participation from other parts of Africa and more representation from outside of South Africa, which is really positive. And we see that there are still gaps remaining in the French and Portuguese speaking. So we do have language challenges around that. And we see that we would need to have kind of almost a parallel process in other languages if we were to include everybody. But just looking at the numbers, we now have a LinkedIn group standing at about 192 members. So look, what are the stories behind these numbers? It was really important to understand who these people are and what are they doing. So this is something really important that we found in the stakeholder mapping survey. We realized that our members are to be found not only teaching on higher education campuses. we saw they are working across sectors and types of organizations. Only half of our respondents, or just over half, were higher education institutions. Others were networks, innovation hubs, private teaching consultancies or academies, and some were more than one. They were not only teaching, but were also doing research, consulting, convening, and a third of our participants, or those respondents, were doing grassroots capacity building. And many who work with higher education staff and students are working with entrepreneurs, community organizations, and industry professionals. So when we think about who we're serving here and what purpose we're serving, we've got a picture. We're equipping future leaders and change makers. We've got to picture a solo entrepreneur with no R&D department working in a rural area with limited access to communication, possibly, or to technology. So these are the kinds of things. We in civil society, the rural economy, outside urban boundaries, or within peri-urban boundaries. So let me share some examples. I thought this is about our members. So to give you an idea of what we're seeing, Ashesi University, one of the partners in the Design Thinking in Africa online program, they have this Ashesi D Lab. And so interesting to see, this is a university program that's building student capacity in design thinking, but also doing so in partnership with corporate and agency clients. So there's also a consulting arm to it, while the students are learning. So these are their project partners, really. And as you see there, just the idea of students being out there, they're working on agriculture, food, energy, technology, and many others. All right. Another example related to Ashesi University, Dr. Gordon Adomza is very instrumental in running the Design Thinking Ghana Hub, a very lively existing network in Ghana and other African countries. And they are at cutting edge of design thinking and looking at AI tools. So that's really interesting to see that. Another interesting one, look at this, not higher education at all, but a pioneering children's museum based in Johannesburg. So Play Africa is really wanting to empower children with innovation skills. And they have developed this toolkit for designing with children, for reimagining cities and communities. So it's really about placemaking. And this is one of the free resources that we've shared in our Knowledge Hub, where you can access a workshop toolkit to take children through this process. And it's a really beautiful resource. So here we have Yux, which is a private, so they're a mix of a consulting agency, a lab that's developing localized methods for user research in Africa. And they're also an academy, so they're running courses. And they've got about 40 researchers spread across various African countries. And they launch an annual, they publish an annual report on the state of human-centered design in Africa. Wonderful work going on. So we're seeing a lot of this tying connection between teaching and practice, as you see here. I want to show you this example. SHIELD is the social hub for innovation, entrepreneurship, leadership, and design thinking. They are based in Kenya. And this is an example that really shows that grassroots capacity building, their focus is on small and medium entrepreneurs, on solving social problems, on bringing about positive change in slums and rural areas. So really quite grassroots, informed and connected to university, but getting the work out there into communities where it is needed the most. So there's a little example, and I hope that those examples of members paints a picture of what we're seeing happening here. So let us see from all of this, what is the network showing us to do? What are we hearing from our members? We hear a great interest in having this African community of practice for design thinking, and there is a generosity and willingness to share and collaborate. We see that we need to connect the dots between role players, to surface the insights that are out there, to pool and share and connect the resources. and to make visible the opportunities that exist for teaching and learning and research. All right. We also see that there's a great need for resources and cases and stories that are generated in Africa, and hence the projects we have going on to gather these, to research and generate and disseminate these African-generated teaching resources. We are also hearing that there's a drive to make design thinking accessible and inclusive and relevant. So really thinking about how we pitch our content. If we're going to develop a design thinking toolkit in different languages, who is it for? You know, what's the purpose and the context in which it will be used? We're also looking at where are the existing activities going on. We know that there's already some work being done in translation to Swahili in Kenya, to Arabic in Egypt, to French in West Africa. So it's about drawing and connecting and bringing all these pieces together in one puzzle. We're also seeing the importance, as has emerged in some of our conversation circles, of building our capacity for cultural humility, for empathy, and to be able to overcome our ethnocentric biases. So this applies at every level, acknowledging that I have my lenses and my positionality. And when I come into a new context, that no matter how similar some aspects of our humanity may be, we need to be humble and really open to learning and listening from within someone else's experiences, the way they see the world. And some of the lessons that I can share. So it is an ongoing process, and I took up this opportunity to speak today in the Spotlight with the knowledge that there is not a complete work in progress that I can share. Look what we've done, and these are the results. It is still growing. And so these are some of the lessons that I can share in the journey so far. So for D-School Africa, I think when they saw the results of the stakeholder mapping survey, I mean, they being the core team that looked at all these results, we realized it's very humbling, actually, that D-School Africa may have the grand building in Cape Town, but we are just one node in a large community. And there's a lot of rich knowledge and expertise out there that can be mobilized and celebrated. The other is just that it's a slow process requiring a lot of patience. And this is the saying that says, if you want to go fast, you walk alone. And if you want to go far, you walk together. So yeah, there could be ways that we could rush in and just do this and go ahead and write up the stories. But we've chosen an approach that is about building relationships, creating community, working together to create this. A challenge that I'm always grappling with is, how do you attract consistent active participation? People are willing, but when we have platforms, people said, oh, we want this, we need that, and then we create them and people don't necessarily participate. So we have to keep asking why and keep that experiment going and keep iterating. So we see a lot of passive passengers that are not actively participating. And although what's really worked so far is inviting co-creation. So for the conversation circles, I ask others to speak. I ask them to help be the tech hosts in the conversations. I ask people to help in a lot of ways, and we do it together. So it's not D-School Africa's network, it's our network. And then it's helpful as well to work with specific role players and build, small agile working groups around particular projects or challenges or topics. The other lessons have been, realizing that we need to cater to the technology and communication challenges. There is unreliable power. There is unreliable internet. Data is expensive. And I'm not speaking about the young students in the city. I'm talking about even the dean of the design faculty in a university who does not have Wi-Fi at the university today. The power is out, and she has to use her own mobile data, and it's really expensive. So in that context, we're asking, are LinkedIn groups and Google Drives and such things the way to go? Or do we, as the Pan-African Design Institute, PADI, does, they use a WhatsApp group effectively. So we really have to look at that, and perhaps the slow participation in some aspects may relate to that. Other thing is, besides all the technology channels that we have and platforms, it's about relationships. We need to take time to get to know each other, to reach out, to connect with people, and to introduce people. And that is really more valuable than what the technology can do for us. At the same time, we do need the communication platforms that are going to enable all this connecting that we want to do. And lastly, I think it's important for us to know, with the technology that we're working with, how do we bring warmth and expressiveness and humanity to these spaces? And yeah, just from our last conversation circle, we had such a wonderful moderator, being Relitza, who was just such a warm, wonderful presence, and it really is possible. So we bring our unique ways of expressing ourselves and connecting, and we do our best. So yeah, that is the story from me of our Afrikan Collaboration Network. So I thank you all so much for hearing. And Uli, perhaps we can hear from you and open up to discussion.
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot, Jenny, for sharing your experiences through the past 2 years and what you are actually building up there. And I think it's a really, really good example. And you are so humble. I think there's already a lot of things going on which are great. So please, big applause for Jenny. And it's for me, it's what you presented here. We could have titled it a little bit different. A kind of a blueprint for a GDTA, for a GDTA chapter, for a regional chapter. Because what you're layouting here and what you're actually practically doing is building the first version of a regional chapter, even if all those members, all those groups you are cooperating with are not members yet, but what you're doing is preparing also the membership. So I think there are some questions. I would be interested, since one of my most astonishing encounters and experiences 2022 at the d.confestival was the close relationship between the term Ubuntu, which is something fundamentally fundamentally kind of the base of the thinking of an African native person that is so close to what design thinking is trying to bring to the world. So, and how is that for you? And we had that discussion on stage, I remember, and it's still resonating, and I still think so. We are trying to describe what we are doing with design thinking with 2 words, but there is one word like Ubuntu, which brings it all together. Maybe you explain a little bit about that, and then we open the floor for discussions and questions.
Right.
Jenny.
Yeah, well, I see Ulrich is there, who was on that very stage in that conversation. And I don't want to claim any expertise, and there's others in the room who might want to add to the discussion. But really, the term Ubuntu is it's a shortened word from a longer phrase that means I am what I am because of who we all are. And it really talks to the kind of collective identity versus an individual focus of our identity, that we're not just, and I think perhaps that's something we might be more, that might align more with European culture, but there's a collective understanding of who we are. And so how this aligns with design thinking, as I understand it, is empathy is inherent in that. There's a inherent interest in others and a connectedness with others. The idea in design thinking that we work in a team and in mixed teams with different points of view and different people coming together, and that the answer doesn't lie with one person, but somewhere in the middle between all of us and all the different colors and textures and perspectives that we bring to a situation. That's just one aspect of it. I don't know if you want to open up to others to add to that, or how perhaps others who relate more personally to the idea of Ubuntu.